History's greatest empires were built not by generals, but by forgotten merchants. The most transformative trade routes were never drawn on any map, operated by traders whose names are lost to time. These hidden networks, moving everything from spices to ideas, fundamentally reshaped civilizations from Rome to the Khmer. By the end of this journey, you will see ancient power through a completely new lens, revealing that commerce, not just conquest, built our world. How did a blue stone from Afghanistan end up in an Egyptian pharaoh's tomb? Why did the wealthiest man in history owe his fortune to a desert no one controlled? The answer lies in the silent footsteps of those who walked paths unknown to our history books. What invisible connections from the past still shape the world you live in today? A lone caravan emerges from a shimmering wall of sand, a ghostly procession of camels and men materializing from the dust. For centuries, these phantom caravans crossed the world's largest desert, carrying fortunes in gold and salt along routes that no official map ever recorded. Historian E.W. Boville described these traders as moving in a silence as profound as the desert itself. Their entire world was built on knowledge passed orally from one generation to the next, a living map held only in memory. This was the Trans-Saharan trade, a hidden network that connected the powerful empires of West Africa like Ghana and Mali to the bustling markets of the Mediterranean. The scale of this exchange is almost unimaginable. It created such staggering wealth that it produced Mansa Musa, a ruler whose fortune remains unmatched in human history. But how did they cross an ocean of sand? The camel was their ship, a creature perfectly adapted to the brutal environment. And just as a ship needs ports, these caravans relied on a chain of secret oasis towns. These hidden hubs provided water, shelter, and a place to trade, functioning as the beating heart of this vast, invisible system. It was not just goods that traveled these routes, but ideas. Islam and its writing systems moved south, transforming cultures and fostering a new era of scholarship. Consider the lost city of Timbuktu. Its legendary reputation as a center of learning, with vast libraries and universities, was built entirely on the trade wealth that arrived silently across the desert. How might our entire understanding of African history shift if we placed these merchant networks at the very center of the story? This desert mystery reveals a profound truth, that the most vital connections shaping our world are often the ones least recorded, silent highways whose echoes still resonate today. While empires rose and fell on land, another kind of power was being woven across the open sea. A wooden dhow catches the wind, its triangular sail pushing it across the Indian Ocean under a blanket of stars. Its cargo holds carry the scent of cinnamon and the cool weight of fine porcelain, navigating a liquid highway that connected continents for over 1,000 years. This was a world of maritime ghosts, a vast and decentralized network linking the coasts of East Africa, Arabia, India, and Southeast Asia, all long before European caravels ever rounded the Cape of Good Hope. This system was not governed by any single emperor or kingdom. Its true rulers were the predictable monsoon winds, which blew merchants east for 6 months and west for the next 6, and a foundation of mutual trust that stretched across thousands of miles. This trust was built by a remarkable phenomenon known as the trade diaspora. Communities of merchants from one land would settle in the foreign ports of another, establishing permanent outposts of their culture and commerce. A Persian trader might live in a Chinese port city, while a Tamil merchant family put down roots in East Africa. These communities became the anchors of trade, creating enduring links of language, custom, and credit that made long-distance exchange possible. Archaeologist Himanshu Prabha Ray describes how these networks were not just moving goods, they were sharing the very tools that made the journeys possible. Technologies like the lateen sail, which allowed ships to tack efficiently against the wind, and the astrolabe, an early navigation tool, spread across the ocean along these merchant routes. Think of the sheer scope of this exchange. African ivory, highly prized for intricate carvings, would travel east, while delicate Chinese celadon ware, a pale green pottery, would journey west to grace the tables of Swahili elites. Religions, too, were passengers on these ships. Buddhism spread from India to Southeast Asia not primarily by missionaries, but by merchants who carried their beliefs with them into new ports. The greatest testament to this maritime system was the Srivijaya Empire. Based on the island of Sumatra, Srivijaya controlled the crucial Malacca Strait, the narrow funnel through which all this trade had to pass. It did not build its wealth on military conquest, but on its mastery of the maritime corridors. Srivijaya became an essential service hub, a place where ships could wait for the monsoon winds to change, repair their hulls, and trade their goods, all under the empire's protection and for a fee. Its power was entirely derived from its control of a choke point in an information network, a strategy that feels remarkably modern. What secrets do these ocean floors still hold? Sunken shipwrecks are time capsules, preserving the exact cargoes of these early globalists and offering silent testimony to a connected world we are only just beginning to understand. This silent commerce of the seas, built on wind and trust, truly paved the way for everything that followed. And as we turn our gaze from the warm, monsoon-driven waters of the South, a different kind of trade network emerges from the frozen silence of the North. A trail of golden, translucent stone connected the frozen Baltic coast to the sun-drenched palaces of the Mediterranean. This was the Amber Road, a whispering path of fossilized resin that moved through the deep forests of barbarian Europe, entirely beyond the fortified borders of the Roman Empire. While Roman legions guarded their walls, this hidden network thrived, proving that the so-called barbarian world was not a land of chaos, but of sophisticated and interconnected economies. Tribes like the Veneti acted as masterful middlemen, controlling the flow of this precious commodity that Romans coveted for its beauty, its supposed magical properties, and its warmth to the touch. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder wrote of amber's mythical origin, claiming it was the hardened tears of poplar trees wept for the sun god, a story that captures the wonder it inspired. This northern gold was not the only thing traveling south. Along these same forest trails moved bundles of luxurious furs and, tragically, human captives sold into slavery. In return, Roman goods flowed northward, fine glassware and gleaming metalwork that became symbols of chieftain power. The discovery of ornate amber artifacts in ancient Mycenaean tombs, far from the Baltic, shows how deep and old these connections truly were. But this exchange had a dangerous consequence for Rome. The wealth generated from the amber trade, centered on deposits like those near the island of Heligoland, empowered northern tribal confederations. It provided them with the resources to organize, arm themselves, and ultimately challenge the very empire that desired their goods. Roman elites adorned themselves with barbarian amber, little realizing that the stone's price was the slow destabilization of their own frontier. Could the desire for a beautiful, glowing stone have fundamentally altered the balance of power in Europe? This story reveals the soft, corrosive power of luxury trade, where the allure of a distant treasure can reshape empires from within. And just as amber moved along these whispering paths, another, even more essential hidden currency was shaping human destiny, a mineral so vital that it was paid to soldiers as wages, salt. Deep beneath the alpine forests, miners descended into tunnels of pure white crystal, carving out a substance more precious than gold to the ancient world. Salt, these subterranean labyrinths like those at Hallstatt, were the hidden sources of a trade network that functioned as the very circulatory system of inland Europe. While empires focused on silver and spice, the salt trails were the true lifeblood of ordinary communities, a necessity for preserving food through long winters and sustaining human life itself. This trade was rarely controlled by kings or emperors. Instead, local clans and specialized guilds held the power, guarding the knowledge of mining and the secret overland paths used for transport. The value of salt was so universal and stable that it became one of humanity's first true currencies. Roman soldiers were famously paid a salarium, an allowance of money specifically for purchasing salt, a word that lives on today in our term salary. This created entire economic spheres of influence centered on a single mineral. An economic historian would point out that a village with access to a salt spring could thrive, while a kingdom denied a salt source could see its armies weaken and its people scatter. The logistics of moving this heavy, bulky commodity were a marvel of pre-industrial engineering. Caravans of pack animals and carts followed meticulously maintained trails, like the Via Salaria, the salt road that crisscrossed Italy. This very road, predating the founding of Rome, was a key factor in the city's early expansion, giving it a strategic advantage over its neighbors. In the scorching Sahara, the salt caravans leaving the brutal mines of Taoudeni were just as vital, trading slabs of precious salt for its weight in gold in the markets of West Africa. So what does it mean that something as simple and essential as salt could build and break alliances between tribes and nations? It reveals a profound historical truth that the most basic human needs, the economics of survival, have always been a primary driver of change, quietly shaping the rise and fall of societies far from the spotlight of great battles and royal decrees. And if a common mineral could exert such invisible power, what world-altering force might be found in the exchange of something that could intoxicate the mind and inspire the human spirit? The official Silk Road glitters in our imagination, a grand highway of camel caravans sanctioned by empires, but its true lifeblood flowed through a shadow world of unofficial trails, a parallel web of secret paths etched into the sides of mountains and across hidden desert valleys. While imperial tax collectors watched the main gates, merchants from places like Sogdia, a Central Asian crossroads, moved along routes they deliberately kept off any map. Picture a Sogdian trader, his saddlebag carefully stuffed with more than just silk. Concealed within are technological secrets and religious texts, traveling along passes avoided by authorities. This was the grassroots network, a system often more resilient and innovative than the state-sponsored trade it operated alongside. These hidden routes were responsible for some of history's most pivotal transfers. The knowledge of papermaking, for instance, traveled west from China not through official diplomatic channels, but along these very trails, carried by merchants and artisans long before the main Silk Road is credited with its spread. Even gunpowder's basic components and the tenets of Nestorian Christianity, a branch of the faith, found their way eastward to the Chinese court through these unofficial channels. The famous Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang, on his journey to India, often hints at these lesser-known paths in his writings, routes used by a mix of devout pilgrims and pragmatic smugglers. The entire system thrived on a brilliant method known as the relay trade. Goods and ideas did not travel from one end of the continent to the other in a single epic journey. Instead, they moved like a baton in a race, passed from one merchant to the next across cultural zones. A Sogdian trader might bring goods to a central point, where a Parthian merchant would take them further, and so on. No single person saw the entire route, which made the network incredibly adaptable and difficult for any one empire to control. The personal stories of these forgotten traders emerge from a remarkable find, the Sogdian letters. These ancient pieces of mail, discovered in a ruined watchtower on the edge of the Gobi Desert, are the poignant voices of the network itself. One letter from a Sogdian woman named Mutne writes to her mother about being abandoned and destitute in a foreign city, a heartbreaking glimpse into the human cost of this long-distance commerce. How exactly did these unofficial exchanges challenge imperial control? They created an economic reality that was borderless. An empire could close an official gate, but it could not easily patrol every mountain pass or desert track. Commerce, driven by sheer human ingenuity, consistently found a way to bypass political boundaries and tariffs, flowing like water around obstacles. The resilience of these shadow networks proves that the most transformative exchanges often happen beyond the reach of governments. And if merchants on land could weave such an intricate, invisible web, what kind of untold stories were being written by those who operated entirely at sea, navigating by the stars on the vast, open ocean? The deep blue of Lapis Lazuli is a color out of place. In the golden burial mask of Tutankhamun, this vibrant stone forms the stripes of the headdress and the inlay of the eyes, a mineral that could only have come from a single, remote source, the mountains of modern-day Afghanistan. How did this stone travel over 1,500 miles to reach the Nile Valley, millennia before the Silk Road was even a concept? This was not a trade route managed by a grand empire, but a chain of hand-to-hand exchanges that began in the Neolithic era, a time before writing, before the wheel, a world without any centralized authority to plan such a journey. The source was the Sa-I-Sang mines, a brutal landscape where miners, using tools of stone and fire, chipped the precious blue rock from narrow cliffs high in the Hindu Kush. This was not a simple exchange of goods, it was the birth of a network, a proof that complex, long-distance commerce is far older than civilization itself. The stone did not travel directly from miner to pharaoh. Instead, it moved through a relay of intermediary cultures. The Indus Valley civilization, with its sophisticated cities like Harappa, acted as a crucial hub, receiving raw lapis from the north and likely shaping it into beads and pendants before passing it westward. From there, the stone would have moved through the emerging towns of Mesopotamia and finally into Egypt. Archaeologists note that the value of Lapis Lazuli was profoundly spiritual. Its deep, celestial blue, often flecked with golden pyrite that shimmered like stars, made it a piece of the night sky made solid. It was associated with the heavens, with divinity, and with ultimate truth, which is why it was reserved for the most sacred of objects and the most powerful of rulers. Nowhere is this more evident than in the royal cemetery of Ur, where the Sumerian queen Puabi was buried in a magnificent headdress of gold and lapis lazuli, the blue stones speaking a universal language of power and connection to the gods. The existence of this network forces us to reconsider our timeline of history. It reveals that the human impulse to connect, to trade, and to assign profound meaning to rare objects is a foundational force, one that built bridges between cultures that otherwise knew nothing of each other. What does this universal craving for a blue stone tell us? That the roots of globalization are ancient, and that the desire for the exotic has always been a powerful engine for human innovation and contact. And if a beautiful, inert stone could inspire such complex journeys, what happened when the goods being traded were not minerals but living, breathing, and deeply intoxicating plants? A single nutmeg, encased in its crimson web of mace, was once worth more than a man's life in the markets of medieval Europe. The source of this intoxicating treasure was a tiny, volcanic archipelago in the far eastern seas, the Maluku Islands. Here, nutmeg and cloves grew wild on a handful of mountains, a biological exclusivity that created a natural monopoly lasting for centuries. Long before any European ship arrived, this spice trade was a tightly held secret of Malay and Javanese sailors, masters of the monsoon winds who navigated a web of routes across the Java and Banda seas. These spices were far more than mere flavorings. In a world without refrigeration, cloves preserved food and masked the taste of spoilage. Physicians prized them as essential medicines, believed to cure everything from toothaches to the plague. To possess them was to display immense wealth and sophistication, turning a pinch of powdered nutmeg into the ultimate status symbol. The Arab geographer Al-Masudi wrote of witnessing vast trading junks, ships so large they carried hundreds of sailors and tons of aromatic cargo, moving these precious goods across the Indian Ocean. The true power, however, lay not in the spices themselves, but in the knowledge required to obtain them. The precise timing of the monsoon winds was a trade secret more valuable than any map, a celestial schedule that dictated when a fleet could safely depart and return. This was a high-stakes race against nature itself. Consider the Sultanate of Ternate, a small kingdom built entirely upon the clove trade. From its volcanic island base, Ternate controlled the production and distribution of the world's most sought-after cloves, amassing enough wealth to build a formidable military and a court of legendary splendor. Its influence reached across Southeast Asia, a testament to how a tiny, specialized node in a global network could exert power far beyond its size. So how did a few scattered islands, whose very locations were a state secret, manage to influence global economics for 1,000 years? The answer is a stark lesson in the power of information control. The world was reshaped not just by the spices people craved, but by the deliberate obscurity surrounding their origin. This relentless quest for flavor and fragrance nudges us to consider a different kind of network, one built not on material goods, but on the most ethereal and powerful commodity of all, pure knowledge. The most transformative cargo carried along the Silk Road was not silk, but a secret. In the year 751, at a remote battle along the Tolas River, an Abbasid Caliphate army clashed with forces of the Chinese Tang dynasty. The battle itself was indecisive, but its true consequence was found among the captured. The Arab forces took prisoner a group of Chinese artisans, skilled in a craft more valuable than any weapon, the art of paper-making. These unnamed craftsmen were not executed or ransomed. Instead, their knowledge was protected, cultivated, and set to work. They were the living key to a technological revolution, and their capture redirected the flow of human knowledge forever. This was not a transfer through diplomacy or conquest, but through the pragmatic channels of a merchant's world, where a useful skill was a form of currency far surpassing gold. The first great paper mill outside of China was soon established in the cosmopolitan hub of Samarkand, a city already thriving as a crossroads of trade. The location was no accident. Samarkand had the essential ingredients, abundant flax and hemp from nearby farms, and a steady flow of clean water from its rivers. Here, the Chinese technique was refined. The artisans learned to use linen rags, creating a pulp that was strained, pressed, and dried into sheets that were both durable and surprisingly smooth. This was not a simple copy, but an innovation, an improvement upon the original craft. From Samarkand, the knowledge traveled with merchants and scholars to Baghdad, the intellectual capital of the Islamic world. Under the Abbasid caliphs, paper found its perfect home. The city became a furnace of intellectual activity, and at its heart was the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. This was not merely a library, but a vast translation institute, a factory for knowledge where Greek, Persian, and Indian texts were systematically translated into Arabic and copied onto this new, affordable medium. Historians of science point to a simple but staggering comparison. To produce a single copy of the Bible on parchment required the skins of approximately 250 sheep. Paper reduced that cost to a fraction. Books were no longer priceless artifacts locked in royal or monastic treasuries. They became tools accessible to merchants, officials, and students. This democratization of knowledge fueled an administrative and scientific explosion. Complex astronomical tables could be accurately recorded and widely distributed. Medical texts could be copied and studied across the empire. The very efficiency of the Islamic State, from tax records to legal decrees, was built on this river of paper. So, could the European Renaissance have happened without this hidden transfer? The answer is almost certainly no. The knowledge preserved and advanced in Baghdad and other Islamic centers, from the algebra of Al-Khwarizmi to the medical canon of Avicenna, eventually traveled through Sicily and Spain into a Europe just awakening from its intellectual slumber. That reawakening was printed on paper, a technology that had journeyed across a continent not in a diplomatic pouch, but on the secret paths of traders and the forced migration of a few skilled hands. This trail of knowledge, more than any exchange of spice or stone, reveals the true power of these networks. They carried the very tools for thought itself. And where the written word travels, can faith be far behind? High in the thin air of the Himalayas, a merchant adjusts the load on his yak, the wooden crate beside him not filled with silk or spices, but with sacred texts. For centuries, the paths snaking through these impossible peaks were walked by a unique fusion of travelers, monks, and merchants moving as one. Their journey was both spiritual and starkly practical, a symbiotic relationship that carried Buddhism from its Indian heartland out across Tibet, China, and all of Southeast Asia. These religious pilgrimage routes were, in the very same moment, thriving commercial highways. Monasteries were not just places of quiet contemplation. They functioned as banks, secure inns, and bustling marketplaces, the economic engines of this high-altitude network. This system was powered by a powerful idea, the concept of merit making through trade. A merchant's profit was not seen as separate from his faith, but as the very means to express it. Wealth earned on the dangerous trails could be donated to fund a new temple, commission a sacred statue, or support a community of monks, turning commercial success into spiritual capital. The Chinese pilgrim Faxian, who traveled to India in the 5th century, left diaries that vividly describe this interdependence. He recounts how he and other pilgrims would attach themselves to large merchant caravans for protection. The merchants, in turn, valued the presence of holy men, believing their prayers offered a layer of divine safety against the bandits and brutal environments of the Silk Road. The items traded along this circuit were as unique as the partnership itself. Tibetan musk, a precious perfume ingredient from the musk deer, would travel east to China in exchange for luxurious silks and intricately crafted metalwork. From the Pala Empire in eastern India came a different kind of export, not a good but an aesthetic. The Pala kings were great patrons of Buddhism, and their distinct style of art, with its elegant bronze statues and illustrated palm leaf manuscripts, traveled north along these routes, shaping the religious art of Tibet and Nepal for generations. Perhaps no site better captures this fusion of commerce and devotion than the Mogao Caves in China. This sprawling complex of hundreds of cave temples, carved into a desert cliff face and filled with some of the world's most breathtaking Buddhist art, was not funded by emperors alone. Inscriptions reveal that many caves were commissioned and paid for by successful merchant guilds, their devotion literally etched into the walls alongside the images of the Buddha. So how did economic pragmatism fuel one of history's great religious expansions? It provided the infrastructure, the security, and the financial lubrication that allowed ideas to travel as reliably as goods. The spiritual and the commercial were not in conflict. They were two sides of the same coin, each enabling the other's journey across the roof of the world. This intricate dance of faith and finance in the Old World finds a startling parallel in a completely different hemisphere, where another set of hidden networks moved through dense jungles and across vast mountains, entirely unknown to the traders of Eurasia. A blade of volcanic glass, sharper than any modern steel, could travel 500 miles from its source, passing through countless hands without a single written contract or royal decree. Across the ancient landscapes of Mesoamerica, from the humid lowlands of the Olmec to the towering Maya city-states, a hidden economy thrived on the flow of obsidian. This gleaming black glass, born from the heart of volcanoes, was the lifeblood of early American civilization, essential for everything from ritual bloodletting to carving the intricate jade worn by kings. These were the Obsidian Highways, a network of staggering sophistication that connected cultures across vast distances, all without the use of the wheel, pack animals, or any form of currency as we know it. The sheer scale of this trade reveals a level of economic organization we are only beginning to appreciate. Archaeologists can now trace a single piece of obsidian back to its exact volcanic source using a technique called trace element analysis. They fire a laser at a tiny fragment, vaporizing it to read its unique chemical signature, like a geological fingerprint. This science allows us to map the invisible. We know, for instance, that the distinctive green obsidian from the mines of Pachuca, located in central Mexico, was found in elite burial sites as far away as the Great Maya center of Tikal, a journey of over 700 miles through dense jungle and over mountain ranges. This was not random barter. This was a highly organized system, managed by a specialized class of merchants who knew the secret paths and maintained complex relationships with distant communities. Centuries later, the Aztecs would formalize this role into a powerful guild known as the Pochteca. These were far more than simple traders. They acted as the empire's eyes and ears, venturing into foreign lands under the guise of commerce to gather intelligence on potential enemies, assess their wealth, and even lay the groundwork for future conquest. They were merchant spies, and their power within Aztec society was immense, living in their own distinct districts and operating under a strict code of conduct. The true power of this network, however, is best seen in the rise of Teotihuacan. Centuries before the Aztecs, this colossal city, with its massive Pyramid of the Sun, dominated ancient Mexico. Its influence did not primarily spread by the sword, but by the blade. Teotihuacan's power was built on its control of key obsidian sources. The city became a production hub, a vast workshop where skilled artisans mass-produced razor-sharp blades and tools that were then distributed across Mesoamerica. Its distinct orange pottery and architectural styles appear in distant cities not as signs of military occupation, but as markers of deep trade relations and cultural influence. So what does the silent, continent-wide journey of a single volcanic rock tell us? It forces a complete re-evaluation of the Americas before European contact. This was not a world of isolated tribes, but a deeply interconnected landscape, a form of early globalization where economies were linked by the essential flow of a single, perfect material. If such complex systems could weave together an entire continent, what untold stories of connection might be hidden beneath the waves of the vast Pacific Ocean? The silence of the Pacific is an illusion. For centuries, it was crossed by the most sophisticated navigators the world has ever known. their catamarans a fleeting stitch between dots of land separated by thousands of miles of empty sea. This was the Polynesian Voyaging Web, a living network of exploration and exchange that connected a triangle of islands larger than any continent, all built upon a library of knowledge held not in books, but in song, star positions, and the subtle taste of ocean currents. Their story begins with the Lapita people, named for a distinctive tooth-stamped pottery they left behind. Starting around 1500 BC, these ancestral voyagers exploded eastward from the islands of Melanesia, pushing ever deeper into the unknown Pacific. They were not lost, they were colonizing with intent, carrying in their great canoes a portable ecosystem, taro shoots, breadfruit saplings, dogs, chickens, and pigs, a complete survival kit for founding new worlds. Their success relied on a science of wayfinding so precise it feels almost supernatural. Master navigators, called PWO, memorized a star compass, the rising and setting points of hundreds of celestial bodies. They read the ocean itself like a map, interpreting the refraction of swells against distant islands, the specific flight patterns of homing birds, and even the cloud formations that gathered over unseen land. A navigation chant from the tradition known as Kepelino might describe the star line for a voyage from Tahiti to Hawaii, a thread of stars to follow across a black velvet sky. This knowledge was a sacred trust passed orally from one generation to the next, a mental chart of an ocean 1/3 of the Earth's surface, and this was not a one-time exodus. The network remained alive, a web of connection. Basalt edzes quarried from a single source in the Marquesas Islands have been found in the Tuamotu archipelago, evidence of sustained trade in essential tools. Volcanic glass from Hawaii has been discovered in the far-flung Society Islands, but the most stunning evidence of this network's reach is a humble vegetable. The sweet potato, a crop native to South America, was being grown across Polynesia from Hawaii to Easter Island to New Zealand, long before Columbus set sail. How did it get there? The most compelling answer is that Polynesian voyagers, in their relentless exploration, reached the coast of South America and returned with this revolutionary food. This single plant's journey rewrites our understanding of pre-colonial globalism, proving that the Pacific was not a barrier but a bridge. So how did these explorers conquer the planet's largest ocean with what we might mistakenly call primitive technology? They possessed a genius we have largely forgotten, an intimate, profound dialogue with the natural world that allowed them to weave a continent from scattered islands. And as we consider this vast, warm water web, it forces a new question: what hidden networks of exchange were being forged in the planet's most frigid and opposite realm, the icy expanses of the Arctic North? A Norse merchant in Greenland would pack his ship with a cargo of ghostly white tusks, curved and heavy, each one a fortune carved from the frozen sea. These walrus tusks, along with the spiraled horns of narwhals prized in Europe as the magical horns of unicorns, became the unlikely economic engine of the North Atlantic. While the Mediterranean world basked in the sun, a silent, desperate trade in Arctic ivory connected the very edge of the habitable world to the heart of medieval commerce. The Norse settlements on Greenland, established around 980, were not self-sufficient farming communities. They were specialized outposts, economic ventures whose entire survival depended on exporting high-value Arctic goods back to Norway and Iceland. For over 400 years, it was the walrus hunt, not agriculture, that paid for the imported timber, iron, and grain these settlers needed to live. The Greenlandic saga describes the perilous voyages to the Norðursetur, the northern hunting grounds where crews would risk their lives to secure these precious tusks. The value was astronomical. A single prime walrus tusk could be worth as much as a cow in medieval Norway, making a shipload of ivory a king's ransom. This trade was not a simple two-way street. It relied on a chain of intermediaries, and none were more crucial than the Sami people of northern Scandinavia. The Sami acted as the essential middlemen between the Norse and the even more remote Arctic resources. They were masters of the inland world, trading furs and other goods with the Norse, who then integrated these products into their wider maritime network. The ships that carried this cargo were not the classic Viking longships of raiding fame, but smaller, sturdier skin boats and knarrs, trading vessels designed to carry heavy loads through the treacherous ice-filled waters. A single, startling find in the state of Maine, a Norse coin minted for King Olaf Kyrre in the late 11th century, hints at the possible reach of this network. While not proof of a Norse settlement, it strongly suggests trade contact, perhaps for luxurious furs or other North American goods, extending the Arctic web across the Atlantic. So why did Europeans risk everything for these northern treasures? The demand for ivory in medieval Europe was insatiable. It was the plastic of its day, carved into exquisite religious objects, from altar pieces and crucifixes to intricate chess pieces like the famous Lewis chessmen. A narwhal tusk sold as a unicorn horn was believed to neutralize poison and was worth many times its weight in gold. This demand did not just sustain a colony, it literally drew the map of the North Atlantic, funding the voyages that connected Greenland to the global economy. The story of Arctic ivory forces us to abandon the idea of remote, isolated peoples. It proves that even the most marginal environments were woven into a global tapestry of desire, where the craving for the exotic in a Parisian cathedral could dictate life and death on a Greenlandic ice floe. And as this northern web of frost and ivory thrived, an entirely different kind of network was taking shape on the world's largest grassland, a horizontal empire built on the backs of horses. A mounted archer could release an arrow with stunning accuracy while riding at a full gallop, a feat of skill that made the nomadic tribes of the steppe both feared and essential. Across the vast, wind-swept grasslands of Eurasia, from the Black Sea to the borders of China, confederations like the Scythians and the Xiongnu did not merely raid settled empires. They mastered a geography of movement, becoming the indispensable facilitators of a massive overland exchange that pulsed along the northern branches of what we now call the Silk Road. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing of the Scythians, captured their profound connection to their environment, describing them as a people whom none can escape, for they have no established cities or fortresses. They were the living, breathing infrastructure of the steppe corridors. Their entire society was engineered for mobility, and this very mobility created a surprisingly stable and resilient system of long-distance trade. They moved with the seasons, driving their herds across thousands of miles, and along these same ancient trails, they transported goods between the disparate worlds of Europe, the Middle East, and East Asia. They traded the products of their pastoral life, hardy steppe horses, luxurious furs, and unfortunately, human captives, for the settled luxuries of silk, grain, and finely worked metals from China and Persia. This was not a haphazard barter. It was a sophisticated economic network operated by people who knew the land like the back of their hand. The stunning gold work recovered from Scythian burial mounds, intricately detailed with animal motifs, is a testament to their wealth and their deep connections. These were not the trinkets of barbarians, but the artifacts of a powerful elite engaged in a continental conversation. Their mobility also allowed for the rapid transmission of military technology. Innovations like the stirrup, which gave a rider unprecedented stability in combat, and the powerful composite bow, crafted from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, spread across Eurasia along these nomadic routes, often changing the balance of power forever. The most breathtaking evidence of this cross-continental trade comes from the frozen tombs of Pazyryk in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. The permafrost acted as a natural deep freeze, preserving a spectacular snapshot of this connected world. Within these burial chambers, archaeologists found the chieftains buried with Chinese silks and elaborately woven Persian carpets, all lying alongside them in the heart of the steppe. How could such a system, built on constant movement, possibly be stable? The answer lies in its decentralized nature. Unlike a single empire that could collapse and sever a trade route, the nomadic network was a web. If one confederation fell or a single path became dangerous, the traffic of goods and ideas could simply shift to another trail, another group of intermediaries. The steppe itself was the stable element, a horizontal empire of grass that allowed for a continuous, flexible flow. This nomadic web formed the durable backbone of Eurasian connectivity, a system that hummed with the movement of people and the things they carried. And just as these horsemen relied on the endless plains, another set of traders looked to a different kind of highway, one that flowed with the relentless current of great rivers. The great rivers of Southeast Asia were liquid spines, the central nervous systems of empires. Along the murky brown currents of the Mekong and the Irrawaddy, fleets of dugout canoes and bamboo rafts moved with a quiet purpose, carrying the wealth of the interior down to the waiting ships of the coast. This was the Riverine network, a world of fluvial highways that gave birth to and sustained legendary kingdoms like Funan, Pagan, and the magnificent Anchor. Their power was not built on dry land alone, but on a profound mastery of moving water, creating hydraulic empires that controlled the flow of both irrigation and international commerce. The entire system pulsed to the rhythm of the monsoon. Predictable, drenching rains allowed for an agricultural surplus on a colossal scale. Vast rice paddies, fed by intricate canal systems, produced more than enough food to feed millions. This surplus was the fundamental catalyst. It freed a massive portion of the population from farming, allowing them to become specialized artisans, soldiers, priests, and of course, the traders who would take their kingdom's unique products to the world. Inscriptions carved on temple walls, studied by epigraphers, reveal these temples were far more than spiritual centers. They functioned as bustling economic hubs, their scribes meticulously recording trade transactions, taxes paid in goods, and the complex logistics of regional exchange. From the kilns of the Khmer Empire came a distinct, beautiful pottery, its green glazed ceramics traveling up and down the Mekong and across the Gulf of Siam. From the mountains of Burma, deep red rubies were extracted and polished, becoming legendary gems sought by courts from India to China. And from the Sumatran forests came camphor, a fragrant crystalline substance used in medicines and religious rituals, its sharp, clean scent perfuming the holds of river craft. The Khmer Empire stands as the ultimate example of this riverine integration. Its engineers did not just rely on natural waterways, they reshaped the entire landscape. A sophisticated network of canals and raised roads connected their capital of Anchor to a satellite of production centers and ports. This man-made web allowed for the efficient movement of troops, the distribution of rice, and the export of their signature goods, from pottery to exotic forest products like ivory and aromatic woods. But this control of trade was about more than just economics. It was the very foundation of their king's divine authority. The god-kings of Anchor presented themselves as the universal rulers who guaranteed the fertility of the land and the prosperity of commerce. Their cosmic kingship was legitimized by their ability to command the water and the wealth that flowed with it. Control of the river trade was proof of their sacred contract with the gods. So how did a king's divine power manifest in the bustling trade of everyday goods? It was visible in every loaded raft that moved under his protection, in every trade good that bore the mark of his kingdom's artisans, and in the very canals that his engineers built, directing the lifeblood of the empire as deliberately as a physician directs the flow of blood. This reliance on flowing freshwater finds a stark and brilliant contrast in the deserts of Arabia, where another kind of river flowed, one made not of water, but of sand and shared faith. The scent of sanctity was a tangible force in the ancient world, a fragrant currency that built kingdoms from the desert sands. For over 1,000 years, caravans of thousands of camels moved in a slow, rhythmic procession out of the remote valleys of southern Arabia, their precious loads not of gold or gems, but of solidified tree sap. This was the Incense route, a network of trails that transformed the region the Romans called Arabia Felix, or Happy Arabia, into a land of legendary wealth. The entire system depended on two rare resins, frankincense and myrrh, which could only be harvested from scraggly trees that grew in the harsh, fog-drenched mountains of modern-day Oman and Yemen. These aromatic substances were not luxuries in the ancient mind, they were absolute necessities. Every major religious ritual in Egypt, Greece, and Rome required their smoke to carry prayers to the heavens. They were essential for embalming the dead, a key ingredient in ancient medicines and a marker of the highest social status. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder grumbled about the exorbitant cost, calculating that the Roman Empire was draining itself of vast sums of silver and gold each year to satisfy its insatiable demand for incense. This immense value created the first great trading kingdoms of the Arabs. In the south, the Sabaeans, the people associated with the legendary Queen of Sheba, controlled the production at the source. Farther north, the Nabateans, with their spectacular rock-cut capital at Petra, mastered the final leg of the journey, distributing the incense to the Mediterranean world. The geography of the route was a lesson in natural monopolies. It began in the Dhofar region, where frankincense trees were scored by skilled harvesters to release their milky tears. From there, the caravans faced a month-long journey up the western edge of the Arabian Peninsula, following a chain of wells and oasis towns. Their ultimate destination was the Nabatean capital of Petra, a city whose grandeur was literally carved from the rose-red cliffs, a testament to the profits of the perfume trade. The survival of these massive caravans in one of the world's most arid landscapes was a feat of hydraulic engineering. The Nabateans were masters of water conservation, carving intricate systems of channels and cisterns into the rock to capture every precious drop of rainwater, creating a man-made river of life in the desert. This controlled scarcity bred legends, none more enduring than that of the lost city of Ubar, a fabled hub of the incense trade said to have been punished by the gods and swallowed by the sands. While its exact location remains debated, the myth speaks to the power and the peril of this ancient enterprise. So how did the smell of sanctity shape the geopolitics of the ancient Near East? It created a form of power that was both spiritual and economic, proving that the human yearning for connection to the divine could fund the rise of entire civilizations, all moving to the rhythmic plod of camels carrying the very breath of prayer. A Jesuit priest in 16th century Japan might carefully unpack two essential items from his traveling chest: a beautifully bound Bible and a detailed report on local silver prices. These men were far more than spiritual guides. They were the vanguard of a new kind of network, a fusion of faith and commerce that would redraw the global map. This missionary merchant alliance became the engine of early modern expansion, a partnership where the cross provided the moral pretext for voyages and trade, provided the hard currency to fund them. The Portuguese in Asia and the Spanish in the Americas perfected this model, their ships carrying a dual cargo of salvation and profit. Missionary letters, often written in code, reveal their authors serving as both confessors and corporate spies, sending back intelligence on rival traders, resource locations, and political alliances that were priceless to their commercial partners. This system moved people and goods on an unprecedented scale. Spanish galleons would transport Mexican silver across the Pacific to Manila, where it was traded for coveted Chinese silk, all under the auspices of spreading Catholicism. In the Atlantic, the brutal triangle trade saw African slaves shipped to Brazilian sugar plantations, a commerce justified by the promise of saving souls, even as it destroyed bodies. The case of Japan stands as a stark lesson in the limits of this alliance. Portuguese merchants, guided by Jesuit contacts like Francis Xavier, were initially welcomed into the port of Nagasaki. For decades, the trade in Chinese silk and Portuguese firearms flourished alongside thousands of conversions. The shogunate, however, grew to see the inseparable link between the foreign religion and foreign influence as an existential threat. The result was a catastrophic reversal, the violent expulsion of all missionaries and the brutal suppression of Japanese Christians, leaving Nagasaki as a mere shadow trade outpost under strict state control. So can the spread of a religion ever be truly separated from the pursuit of profit? This symbiotic relationship, for all its immense global impact, forces us to recognize a humbler truth. While empires and churches built these grand, interconnected systems of faith and finance, the most fundamental networks of all were those woven by ordinary people, trading not for glory or God, but simply for the means to see another day. A chief stands before his community, not hoarding his wealth but giving it all away. In the misty forests of the Pacific Northwest, the most powerful leaders were those who demonstrated the most extravagant generosity. This was the potlatch, a ceremonial feast where vast quantities of goods, from finely woven blankets to canoes and food, were distributed to guests. Far from being a simple giveaway, this was the engine of a sophisticated economic system built on reciprocity and deep social obligation, a model that sustained complex societies for millennia without a single coin or central state. The entire coast functioned as a network of specialized production. The Haida, master carvers from the islands, built massive seagoing canoes from the towering red cedars, vessels that were both artistic marvels and the freight trucks of their day. The Tlingit, using mountain goat wool and cedar bark, wove the intricate, rhythmic patterns of Chilkat blankets, garments that told stories and conveyed high status. These were not mere crafts, they were forms of stored wealth and cultural knowledge, produced for the express purpose of exchange within this regional system. Oral histories passed down through generations describe the great trading feasts, where the prestige of a lineage was measured not by what it kept, but by what it could afford to give. A chief's power was directly tied to his network of alliances, and those alliances were cemented through gifts. The most vital trade routes were known as the Grease Trails. These were ancient paths winding from the coast deep into the interior, used to transport a uniquely valuable commodity, eulachon oil. The eulachon, or candlefish, is so rich in fat that when dried, it can be lit like a candle. This oil was a concentrated source of calories and nutrients, a precious substance traded from the coast up the rivers and over mountain passes. A single container of this oil could be exchanged for a fortune in furs, hides, and other inland goods, lubricating the entire regional economy. The reach of these networks was vast. Archaeologists have traced obsidian, a volcanic glass essential for tools, from its source at Mount Edziza in modern-day British Columbia. This distinct stone has been found in sites hundreds of miles away, evidence of a web of connection that moved essential materials across a challenging landscape of mountains and fjords. So what can our modern, profit-driven economics learn from these ancient systems of gift exchange? They challenge our very definitions of wealth, suggesting that value is not always about accumulation, but about circulation, and that the strongest economy might be one where generosity is the highest form of currency. This profound alternative to market logic guides us next to a different kind of material pursuit, one that glittered and shaped a continent, the world of indigenous metal traders. A single shipwreck tells the story of an entire world economy. Off the coast of Turkey, the Uluburun ship settled on the seafloor over 3,000 years ago, its hull packed with 10 tons of Cypriot copper ingots, a ton of rare tin, gleaming ebony, and golden ivory. This vessel was a floating warehouse of international trade, its cargo sourced from every corner of the known world, from the Baltic to the Nile. Its discovery revealed the stunning scale and complexity of the Bronze Age's most vital network, the frantic, globe-spanning search for tin and copper. Without these two metals, the era that defined it could not exist. Copper was plentiful, mined in vast quantities on Cyprus, an island whose very name derives from the metal. But copper alone is soft. It was tin, a rare and mysterious element that transformed it into bronze, a hard, durable alloy that made superior weapons, tools, and art. The scarcity of tin was the driving force. Sources as far apart as Cornwall in Britain and the mountains of Afghanistan were actively exploited, their precious ore traveling thousands of miles through countless hands to feed the smelters of empires. Metallurgists today use isotope analysis, a kind of chemical fingerprinting, to trace the origin of ancient bronze artifacts. The results are startling, showing that the bronze in a Mycenaean dagger found in Greece could contain tin from Central Asia, while a Hittite ceremonial axe might be forged from metal mined in distant European streams. This was the first truly international system, a web of dependency that connected great powers. The Mycenaean Greeks, the Canaanite merchants of the Levant, and the Hittite Empire of Anatolia all acted as critical middlemen, facilitating the flow of these essential materials. They were the brokers of antiquity, their fortunes rising and falling with the supply of raw metal. Cyprus stood as the undisputed copper hub, its mines producing the reddish metal so vital that the island became a strategic prize, fought over and influenced by every major power. The entire edifice of Bronze Age civilization, with its grand palaces and complex societies, was built upon this fragile chain of supply. So what happens when such a deeply interconnected system shatters? The evidence points to a catastrophic domino effect, as political instability and invasions disrupted the overland and maritime routes. The tin and copper circuits faltered. The cost of bronze would have skyrocketed, armies would have found themselves unable to replace weapons, and the economic foundation of the palace economies crumbled. The collapse of this metal trade did not just contribute to the broader Bronze Age collapse, it was a primary cause. The dependence on distant, critical resources created the world's first global economy, and its failure offers a timeless lesson on the vulnerability of interdependence. This ancient craving for a superior metal set the stage for the next great pursuit, one that would weave an even more delicate and luxurious thread across the continents. A Chinese monopoly on silk lasted for centuries, guarded by a secret more valuable than any finished bolt of cloth, the living knowledge of sericulture. The West craved the final product but remained utterly dependent on the East for its supply, a dependency that drained treasuries and placed immense strategic power in the hands of those who controlled the source. This was a technological black box of immense proportions, and breaking it required not just skill but subterfuge. Earlier powers like the Sasanian Persians had tried to control the trade by dominating the overland routes, acting as a profitable middleman between China and Rome, but they never cracked the core secret of how to create the thread itself. The true turning point arrived in the 6th century, not with an army, but with a small group of monastic spies. The Byzantine historian Procopius records the daring mission commissioned by Emperor Justinian. 2 Nestorian Christian monks who had proselytized in India and learned the methods of sericulture returned to Constantinople with an offer. They explained to the emperor that they could end his reliance on Persian intermediaries by bringing him the very source of silk itself. Their plan was audacious in its simplicity. They hollowed out their walking staffs, filling the cavities with silkworm eggs, and smuggled them past every border guard and customs post along the lengthy land route from Central Asia. This was industrial espionage on a world historic scale, and it worked. With those tiny eggs and the monks' crucial knowledge of how to care for the mulberry trees the worms required, the Byzantine Empire established its own silk industry, forever breaking the Chinese monopoly. The process they revealed was agonizingly complex. Sericulture is a year-round commitment, a delicate dance of biology and timing. It begins with the cultivation of white mulberry trees, the only leaves the Bomyx mori silkworm will eat. The worms themselves are incredibly fragile, susceptible to drafts, loud noises, and disease, requiring constant, meticulous care. After gorging themselves for weeks, each worm spins a single, continuous filament of silk, up to 900 meters long, to form its cocoon. To harvest this filament without breaking it, the cocoons are placed in hot water, loosening the sericin, the gum-like substance that holds the silk together. Then comes the most painstaking part, the reeling, where the fine filaments from several cocoons are carefully gathered and twisted together to form a single, strong thread strong enough for weaving. Replicating this entire ecosystem outside of China was a monumental achievement. The knowledge did not stop in Constantinople. It spread westward to Syrian cities like Beirut and Tyre, which became renowned for their intricate silk brocades, and from there the craft traveled across the Mediterranean. In the Italian city of Lucca, a silk industry flourished in the 12th and 13th centuries, leveraging the city's existing banking and merchant networks to become a dominant force in European luxury trade. The weavers of Lucca developed their own distinctive patterns and techniques, creating silks that clothed cardinals and kings, proving that the transferred technology could not just be copied, but innovated upon. So how does the movement of a single insect redefine empires? It demonstrates that the most profound shifts in global power are not always born on the battlefield. They can hatch quietly in a darkened room, dependent on a leaf and a worm, and carried across continents in the hollowed-out staff of a determined traveler. This story of high-stakes technological theft forces our gaze away from the coasts and deserts toward the deep interior of another continent, where a different kind of resource was being traded along networks just as complex and far less known. Gold dust was weighed against the delicate quills of a bird's feather, a measure of such precision it reveals a trade built on absolute discretion. Deep in the forests of West Africa, miners would leave their precious dust at a silent market, a riverbank clearing, and then retreat into the trees. North African merchants seeking the source of this legendary wealth would then approach. They laid out their own goods, salt, cloth, and copper, and THEN Chinese letter withdrew. The miners returned, and if the pile of goods satisfied them, they took it, leaving the gold. If not, they vanished again, forcing the merchants to increase their offer until the gold was finally taken. This was the system of dumb barter, a transaction conducted entirely without words, designed to protect the greatest secret of all, the location of the gold fields themselves. Arab geographers like al-Bakri wrote of the king of Ghana, a figure of almost mythical power, who held a nugget of gold so large it served as his hitching post, while he himself sat upon a throne of solid gold. This was not mere Chinese letter. It was a calculated display of economic strength, a signal to the world that he controlled the tap for a river of wealth that flowed all the way to the dynasties of North Africa and the minting houses of medieval Europe. The true architects of this system were the Wangara, a specialized class of Malink merchants. These men were the keepers of the map, the only ones who knew the intricate paths through the dense forests and savanna to the remote gold-producing regions. Their networks were so secretive and effective that they managed to keep the actual sources of gold, like the fabled mines of Bambuk and Bure, hidden from the outside world for centuries. This deliberate obscurity was the very foundation of West African power. The wealth it generated did not just fill royal treasuries, it built civilizations. In cities like Timbuktu and Janai, gold funded an extraordinary cultural flourishing. The Great Mosque of Janai, with its iconic, sun-baked adobe towers rising from the earth, is a monument to this hidden economy. Its very existence and the vast centers of Islamic scholarship that grew alongside it was paid for by the silent exchange of gold dust. Yet this system of anonymity came with a profound human cost. The legendary wealth of Mansa Musa, whose pilgrimage to Mecca destabilized economies with the sheer volume of gold he spent, was built upon the labor of countless unnamed miners and the logistical genius of traders whose stories are lost to us. What does it mean that some of history's most dazzling achievements were funded by a commerce that depended on never speaking its own name? It forces us to listen for the echoes of other silent exchanges, where the flow of a substance, not the words around it, truly wrote the story. A fragment of red coral pulled from the depths of the Mediterranean could purchase a human life in the markets of West Africa. This was not a trade in spices or silks, but in objects of pure symbolism where beauty and rarity were minted into currency. Across the ancient world, two organic treasures, coral and cowrie shells, wove together separate economies into a single, interlocking system. From the coral fisheries off the coasts of Sicily and Tunisia, divers braved the cold depths to break away the precious, branch-like formations. Merchant manuals from the era describe with meticulous care the precise grading of these crimson stones, their value determined by the richness of their color and the complexity of their form. This coral was not destined for jewelry boxes in Rome, but for the kingdoms of the African interior, where it was ground into sacred powder or carved into beads that held immense spiritual and political power. Simultaneously, in the warm waters of the Indian Ocean, another harvest was underway. Millions of tiny, porcelain-like cowrie shells were gathered from the reefs of the Maldives, sorted and threaded onto strings. These shells, with their glossy, white surfaces and distinctive slit, became one of the most enduring forms of money in human history. Their value was rooted in their perfection and uniformity, each one nearly identical to the next, making them impossible to counterfeit. In the Bengal Sultanate, cowries were the small change of a vast economy, used for daily market purchases and tax payments, allowing commerce to flow smoothly at the most local level. The real magic happened where these two networks met. The same Italian merchant galley that carried a cargo of red coral from the Mediterranean might return from the east laden with sacks of cowries. These shells then traveled across the Sahara, where they were used to purchase gold, ivory, and other goods, creating a circular exchange of organic currency that connected continents. How does a simple object, a shell or a piece of coral, become so valuable? Its worth is not inherent, but bestowed by the collective belief of people separated by thousands of miles. A cowrie shell in the Maldives was a common souvenir of the sea, but that same shell in the Kingdom of Dahomey was a coin that could buy food or cloth. This trade reveals the fundamental social construction of money, proving that value is a story we all agree to tell. And if a society could assign such power to a beautiful object, what did it mean when the most valuable and tragic commodity traded was a human being? A human life could be purchased in the Black Sea port of Kaffa with a bolt of linen or a handful of silver coins. This was the final, chilling transaction at the end of a vast and invisible network, a system of forced migration that wove across continents for centuries, long before the transatlantic trade began. The slave trade of the ancient and medieval worlds was a brutal but deeply embedded artery in the global body of commerce, its routes as established as those for silk or spices, yet far more tragic in their human cargo. While we must never forget the profound suffering, understanding these networks reveals how the forced movement of people was a foundational, if horrific, element of pre-modern economies. The logistics were chillingly efficient. In Eastern Europe, the steppe corridor served as a raiding zone where Crimean Tatars would capture individuals from Slavic villages. Across the Sahara, specialized routes, separate from those carrying gold, were dedicated solely to human traffic, with caravans moving from sub-Saharan Africa toward markets in North Africa and the Middle East. In the Indian Ocean, the Zanj rebellion in 9th century Mesopotamia, described in Arab chronicles, was a massive uprising of East African slaves forced to labor in deadly salt marshes, a testament to the immense scale of this system and the desperate resistance it provoked. The roles these enslaved people were forced into were remarkably varied, shaping the societies that held them. Young men from the Eurasian steppes could be trained as elite soldier slaves, the Mamluks, who would eventually rule Egypt themselves. Educated individuals could find themselves serving as administrators and scribes in the Abbasid Caliphate, their skills leveraged to run a vast bureaucracy. The geographic scope was staggering, exemplified by the Viking slave trade, which moved captured people from the British Isles across Europe and all the way to the bustling markets of the Islamic world, connecting societies through a commerce of human misery. How did these networks shape the demographic and cultural landscape of whole regions? They created diaspora communities in foreign lands, transferred crucial skills against their will, and left an indelible, somber mark on the genetic and social fabric of continents. The history of these routes is trade's darkest facet, a sobering counterpoint to the exchange of luxuries, reminding us that the most valuable and tragic commodity traded was often human potential itself. Their eventual decline, spurred by shifting economic models and moral reckonings, leads us to a final, overarching question about the nature of all these hidden networks. A caravan master in the 15th century would have felt the world shifting beneath his feet, a slow but certain crumbling of an ancient order. The arrival of European ships in the Indian Ocean did not extinguish the overland routes in a single blow, but began a long, painful process of obsolescence that left once great cities stranded by the side of history. This was a transition measured in generations where the economics of distance were rewritten by the sail. A sea route could move spices from the Moluccas to Lisbon in a single, if perilous, voyage, bypassing a dozen middlemen and the exorbitant tariffs of every desert emir and mountain kingdom along the Silk Road. The Portuguese circumnavigation of Africa was not merely a navigational feat. It was an act of economic severance, redirecting the lifeblood of commerce away from the heart of Asia and into the holds of European caravels. Simultaneously, the very land these caravans crossed was transforming under their feet. The rise of powerful, centralized gunpowder empires like the Ottomans and the Safavids consolidated territory that had once been a patchwork of smaller, competing states. While this brought a measure of security, it also meant higher, more standardized taxes imposed by a single authority, eroding the merchants' profit margins that thrived on navigating fragmented political landscapes. Then came the Black Death, a biological hurricane that swept along these very trade routes in the 14th century. It did not just kill people, it devastated the trading populations themselves, the merchants, camel drivers, and innkeepers who formed the living tissue of the network. Their loss created a demographic and economic shock from which some communities never recovered. The great Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta, in his later writings, hints at this slow decay. He describes cities that once pulsed with commercial energy now seeming quieter, their markets a little less full, their caravanserais a little more empty. The final, poignant symbol of this decline is the fate of Merv in modern Turkmenistan. Once one of the largest cities in the world, a thriving Silk Road oasis known as the Queen of the World, it was sacked by the Mongols and then slowly withered as trade routes shifted. By the time the Age of Discovery was in full swing, Merv was already a ghost of itself, its magnificent libraries and bustling bazaars surrendering to the desert sands, a metropolis reduced to a scattering of ruins. What is truly lost when a network like this dies? It is not merely the trade goods, it is the connections, the shared knowledge, the cultural pollination that happened in the caravanserais and market squares. The end of these routes meant the isolation of entire cultures, cutting them off from the constant, renewing stream of ideas and innovations that had sustained them for a millennium. The world was reorganized around its coastlines, and the continent's interior began a long period of economic and often intellectual quietus, setting the stage for a global order dominated by those who commanded the sea. Yet, even as the caravans faded, the human impulse to connect found new channels, weaving a different kind of web across the vast, empty spaces they left behind. The road you drive on today might be 5,000 years old. Beneath the modern asphalt lies the ghost of a Roman road, which itself was paved over a prehistoric footpath worn smooth by the first traders carrying amber or salt. These ancient networks are not lost, they are simply buried in the layers of our world, etched into our languages, our meals, and our very blood. The word sugar wins its way back through Old French and Italian to the Arabic sakar, which itself was borrowed from the Persian shakar, a term that originated in ancient Sanskrit. The sweet history of a single word traces the entire map of the old trade routes, from the Indian subcontinent to your morning coffee. The same is true for the word orange, which traveled from a Dravidian language in southern India into Persian, then Arabic, and finally into European tongues, its journey mirroring the fruit's own path westward. This linguistic archaeology reveals a world in constant conversation. Long before the internet, our bodies tell a similar story. Genetic studies now map the slow, persistent migration of people along these commercial trails, showing how the Y chromosomes of men in Central Asia carry markers linking them to the Mediterranean, while sub-Saharan African DNA appears in populations north of the Sahara, a quiet testament to the caravans that moved more than just gold. The geographer James Scott argues that many of our great cities are not where they are by accident. They grew at the choke points and crossroads of these old systems, at the river fords where goods were transferred from camels to boats, or at the mountain passes where caravans had to converge. The strategic location of a place like Istanbul or Samarkand was determined not by a king's whim, but by the relentless logic of commerce. Our dinner plates are living museums of this exchange. Imagine Italian food without the tomato, a food native to the Americas that only arrived in Europe after 1500, or Thai cuisine without the chili pepper, another American plant that transformed Asian cooking. These were not minor additions, they were culinary revolutions shipped as hidden cargo on the galleons and caravans of merchant adventurers. The world's religious landscape was also distributed along these highways. Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam did not spread by accident. They followed the reliable paths of trade, moving with the merchants who needed spiritual solace on their long journeys, and who built temples and shrines at every major trading post. Even today, China's massive Belt and Road Initiative consciously frames itself as a revival of the Silk Road, a modern infrastructure project built upon the ghost of an ancient network, proving that the geography of connection remains stubbornly persistent. So the next time you drive down a straight highway or savor a food from a distant continent, ask yourself, are you making a choice, or are you following a path laid down for you centuries ago by a forgotten trader whose name is lost to time, but whose footsteps you still walk in? From the Baltic amber trails to the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean, we have traced the silent footsteps of those who moved between the lines of history. The grand narrative of empires and conquests is only the surface. Beneath it lies a deeper, more enduring story, a complex tapestry woven by countless unnamed traders, guides, and sailors whose choices and journeys quietly shaped our world. These individuals operating on forgotten paths were the true agents of change, the living channels for cultural exchange, technological diffusion, and economic integration that empires merely took credit for. Their legacy challenges us to look past the official chronicles, to see the deep, underlying connections that have always bound humanity together across deserts, mountains, and seas. The great historian Fern and Braudel would point to this as the longue durée, the long-term rhythms of history found not in the flash of a battle, but in the enduring patterns of everyday exchange that outlast any single king or dynasty. Let this exploration stand as a reminder that the most profound transformations often occur in the shadows, away from the spotlight of recorded history. We invite you to look at your own world with this new lens. Consider the food on your plate, the words in your language, the very routes you travel. Each carries the echo of an ancient journey made possible by a forgotten trader whose name is lost to time. Share in the comments which of these hidden stories resonated most deeply with you, and subscribe to continue unraveling history's greatest mysteries together.